Hi, everybody. I'm Professor Bentley Allan of Johns Hopkins University. I'm the co-director of the Net Zero Industrial Policy Lab, and I'm delighted to be with you today. I wrote about the role of Global South partnerships in building out critical minerals supply chains. And my starting point for this is really to look at the U.S. strategic situation. The net zero transition broadly is creating massive demand for critical minerals, but the IRA in particular is creating strong demand in the United States as we see more and more projects, both in terms of manufacturing solar panels and wind turbines, but also batteries and other clean energy technologies, are creating lots of demand for every aspect of the upstream supply chains, including critical minerals. And at the same time, the United States is trying to friendshore and de-risk those supply chains in order to reduce reliance on Chinese supply, which is dominant in almost all of the critical minerals that are essential for the transition. And in order to do this, in order to build out these supply chains at the scale necessary, in the time frame necessary, the U.S. needs a really concerted and focused global strategy. It's not going to be able to do this itself. And in order to increase production at the rates that we need to increase production, we're going to have to build things out in a really rapid and truly global way. At the same time, and my memo starts by really talking about all the different things that are going on geopolitically, both for the United States and for other countries in the world, whether it's Europe trying to get off of Russian natural gas, the heating up of US and Chinese political tensions, and so on and so forth. There's really a lot going on. And so at the same time as trying to rapidly build out these critical mineral supply chains, the US is making a bid for leadership in the global order, and really to try to rebuild that order around industrial policy. And it seems to me this is the significance of the speeches that Janet Yellen and Jake Sullivan gave back in May. And that bid for leadership really depends on it being able to provide political and economic benefits to countries all throughout the world, right? This is something that China is already doing and doing a good job of as it goes to secure the supply chains that it needs for its growing energy needs. And so really producing those political and economic benefits means, in a way, sharing manufacturing value added. There's a real risk at the heart of Bidenomics that by reshoring all the manufacturing value added, that this traditional lever for increasing prosperity and economic well-being in developing countries will be taken away from them, right? Of course, countries in the Global South understand this. The countries have been very clear that they are not going to allow a rerun of colonial extraction in which rich developed countries simply take out raw critical minerals and sell back products with manufacturing value added contained in them. They're not going to stand for that. And so U.S. leadership and its ability to build out supply chains rapidly really depends on a concerted Global South strategy. Well, we can see kind of emerging two kinds of models. I mean, lots of kinds of models, but I'll set up a false dichotomy for us just so that we can think it through. And I draw on the work of Alvin Kamba, Kevin Gallagher, and Gwani Lim, which present a really great analysis comparing Indonesia and Malaysia. They critique Malaysia's strategy to become a low-cost manufacturing hub for not really thinking about how to do tech transfer in a serious way, and merely allowing China to locate the lowest possible value add component of the supply chain, which is the assembly of solar panels and things like that in Malaysia. Indonesia, by contrast, has put an export ban on raw nickel, and that will allow them to build up more processing capacity in the country. But they're also seeking actively to create linkages on what Hirschman would call the backward side or the upstream side of the nickel industry. So looking for companies to provide the inputs necessary to mine and process nickel, whether it's from the food for the cafeterias, for the workers, or the metal alloys that are needed for the equipment and the equipment itself. They're really making a concerted effort to both build up that part of the supply chain and go all the way downstream into batteries. And reading Albert Hirschman and his 1958 classic, The Strategy of Economic Development, in this light is really instructive, because Hirschman had a strong theory that it was the cultivating and the creation of linkages amongst the economy that really helped an economy develop. And it was that contextual, deep work of building and problem solving within the economy and the natural linkages in capital formation that were happening in the economy, which was lost to the sort of formalistic, methodologically driven development economics literature that emerged, around the same time that Hirschman was writing, but which became dominant in the field. And so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but just to say that recent evidence presented in a really brilliant paper by Danny Roderick and Rekha Juha and Nathan Lane about evidence for industrial policy and its effectiveness have showed the importance of downstream linkages. So thinking about an upstream sector like mining, and then seeing how the benefits of having a high value add sector, building manufacturing on the back of it, allows you to have really strong outcome effects in industrial policy. And they look at Korea and other examples in a new light as a result of that. Let's just say that there is some economics to back up the strategy that Indonesia is putting forward. And of course, the Indonesian strategy has lots of imitators. And I just wanted to inject a word of caution into that by really starting to peel apart the factors that actually make the Indonesian case likely to be successful. And that would then allow us to evaluate how generalizable that model was, and really push us back into Hirschman's dictum, which is really actually that each development situation is highly unique and that countries need to pursue their own policy goals as a process of experimental problem solving. And Chuck Sable has been really good about keeping these themes of Hirschman's work alive in his great work on experimentalism, including in collaboration with David Victor in their great book, Fixing the Climate. So those factors that really will affect whether or not resource nationalism and efforts to create export bans will actually generate long-term development outcomes actually hinge on a couple of different things. First of all, the strategic value of the minerals really matters a lot. Indonesia has a lot of leverage because it has a lot of nickel, and nickel is really important and actually not that easy to develop in mining terms. Whereas the countries replicating Indonesia's strategy with lithium bans might find that it's harder for their products to attract the same kind of FDI at that processing and secondary metallurgical stage, because there's just more lithium in the world, and there's more lithium processing that can be brought online more quickly, whether that's through direct lithium extraction, which is starting to come online in North America, or in the other lithium projects throughout the world. So I think lithium producers might find it harder to have the same kind of leverage that Indonesia has gotten in nickel. The second is the quality of the linkages that are created by a particular sector. Nickel is prized because of its ability to contribute to batteries, but also to steel. There's a big industrial economy waiting downstream of nickel mining. That's less true in the case of lithium and in other metals in the energy transition. Copper we might put in the same category as nickel, but we could think about how we would disaggregate metals according to their strategic value and the linkages, therefore, that they create in a broader strategy of economic development. We really need to think through those things clearly if we're going to think about how generalizable the Indonesian model is. The third critical factor of success for these countries in developing a development strategy on the basis of critical minerals is going to be their alignment with policy goals and sustainability goals globally. Indonesia actually might struggle because the nickel that is going to come out of its market is going to be very dirty and is going to be attached to Chinese investment. This will create two liabilities for the ability of Indonesian nickel to meet downstream markets. And so countries that can actually both align with policies such as the IRA and be geopolitically de-risked are going to be favored in the global market. I'm thinking a lot about all the foreign direct investment going into Morocco's battery supply chain. They already had a manufacturing base for automotives that was feeding Europe, which it can build on. But also it has a free trade agreement with the United States. So battery components produced in Morocco can go into the United States and qualify for the EV credits there. But another important aspect of the Moroccan situation is that geopolitically it's de-risked. It's an independent country. It's not seen as being on one side or the other. And this is part of the reason why Chinese firms are actively investing in Morocco. And you can check out a really great memo on this led by our research associate at the lab, Hannah Zhang. If you go to netzeropolicylab.com and go to our publications, and you'll see a Morocco brief there, which I'm very proud of, which really uncovers the dynamics unfolding in that country. The final factor, which didn't make it into my memo because it only occurred to me as I was preparing to give this presentation, is the actual the ability of countries to benefit from critical minerals really depends on the project finance structure of the individual mines that are and processing units that are developed. We're doing some work on the lab on this right now. And if I hadn't been so busy trying to launch the lab over the last 3 weeks, I might actually have some data to present to you. But we're doing a study right now which decomposes critical minerals value chains into their different pieces, and then starts to move pieces between the South and the North to show the overall value of those projects to countries in the global South versus the global North. And also to look at different project finance structures in order to show the benefits of, say, taking an equity stake or charging royalties versus taking an equity stake, and so on. And this, of course, has emerged in the conversation around Chile. Chile has announced that it's going to take an equity stake in its projects, and the firms have spat back. Well, why don't we just take an increased royalty percentage instead? And there's some complex modeling that needs to be done there on the financial side to make sure that countries are getting a good deal from these kinds of agreements. And that's something that the lab is hoping to really do some rigorous work on in order to inject some ideas into that space so countries can be able to strategically work on that. So what I've hoped to have done in the memo and in this talk is really lay out some of the critical factors that will allow countries to think about how they might benefit from critical minerals as they think about sustainable development and supporting a potential US alliance. And just to say that the US is going to have to get really serious about these issues and really think hard about these potential benefits and how these countries can actually reap these potential benefits if they're going to actually build long-term partnerships in these countries. They'll know whether or not they're getting a good deal, and they'll know whether or not critical minerals development is actually translating into something of true political and economic benefit in their country. So the US needs a really focused strategy. And that focused strategy needs to have a very clear vision of what a collaborative value chain that actually shares and distributes value added between North and South looks like. It needs to actually think about how we're going to build manufacturing value added overseas, how we can use tools like sovereign wealth funds from countries in the global North, how we can use organizations like the Development Finance Corporation in the United States, the Export-Import Bank, et cetera, to build manufacturing value added in these overseas jurisdictions. And finally, we need to think hard about how we can create the kinds of institutions that Colin Hendricks talks about in his memo, which would actually reinforce a high road sustainable standard in critical minerals, because this is going to be, I think, really essential to standing up friendshoring, because many of the resources coming out of the Chinese supply chain will be rightfully discounted for their inability to meet sustainability standards. And so I think really strong standards through something like the Global Battery Alliance are going to be absolutely essential, as well as EITI and other initiatives in the critical mineral space are going to be really essential to making a strong market that can actually produce a club good, which is, de-risked minerals that actually meet high environmental and climate standards. And we're not going to be able to do any of this if we don't really start thinking hard about the benefits that this critical minerals build out is going to provide to developing and emerging markets throughout the world. And I hope to have contributed a small piece of work through the memo and in this video, and more work that we're actively doing at the Net Zero Industrial Policy Lab at Johns Hopkins University. Thank you for your time. I look forward to meeting you.